So, in the second instalment of these videos on finishing unfinished projects, we're going to tackle this apple graft union. So these apple graft unions is irregular growth that grows between the scion on the rootstock. It looks a little bit like a burr or a burl, but it isn't, but it does have very interesting figure, grain patterns and colouring. Now this piece has got some very deep cracks in there, which I'm going to fill with some resin. Now this piece is part hollowed, therefore I can insert a balloon inside before I pour the resin in to save resin. Now I'm going to mask up the holes in the outside so the resin doesn't leak out using a combination of frog tape and gorilla tape, which I've successfully used before. I found that if the wood is clean and it's dry, there is no seepage of resin through the tape. Now, having pre-mixed some resin and added a green tint to it, I can now slowly pour it into the apple union, trying to ensure that all the cavities are filled with the resin. So, having filled the cavities with resin, I can now just pop it into the pressure pot where I can leave it a couple of days to eliminate any bubbles in the resin. Okay, a couple of days later, I can release the pressure from the pressure pot and see how it turned out. Now, as soon as I opened the pressure pot, it suddenly dawned on me. For some very strange reason, of course, I forgot to consider the fact that the pressure would collapse the balloon and then allow the resin to run to the bottom of the pot. Okay, so that wasn't very clever, was it? Never mind. No spillage, the resin ran into the bottom of this ice cream tub which I had the piece sitting in, and subsequently I've made up another cup of resin, poured it in the top and let it cure over another 24-hour period. First steps then, remove as much of this tape as possible, get the item mounted between centres and remake the tenon. The pink thing you can see sticking out the end there was the remnants of the balloon. Now, one of the challenges I always have with Apple is its volumetric shrinkage rate, which is around 18%. This pretty much means that warping and cracking is pretty much going to be a feature no matter what you do to it. Now, because of the size of the tenon that's remaining, I have to mount it in the C-jaws. This is not ideal. I would have liked to have mounted it in the Colossus jaws, but in fact the resin has helped stabilise the tenon quite a bit. Now, because there is a lot of resin present here, I'm using my Glen Teagle's carbide tools to reprofile the outside. Now, the shape of this item is not panning out to be very traditional or even particularly attractive, but I'm very governed by the amount of excavation that I'd already done originally in this piece. Now, you can see at the bottom of the piece there is a little pink LED light. This is the lamp that was originally part of the balloon. As previously mentioned, this piece had been quite extensively hollowed already, so it's just a case of tidying up inside. So I remove most of the material using my Simon Hope mini hollower and move over to the Crown Cryo MIDI hollowing system with the scraper attachment. You will note there's quite a lot of resin coming out in the shavings from the voids and from the spillage inside. Moving on to abrasive work, I simply go down the grits from a 120 down to 400 grit. From previous experience working with fruitwoods, especially apple, I found that Danish oil, or multiple coats thereof, gives me the best finish. Danish oil does really bring out the grain and makes the colours pop. But before I apply the Danish oil, I do give the wood a good clean, first of all using the air line, then a good washing with methylated spirits or denatured alcohol. I applied 2 or 3 coats of Danish oil from the Hampshire Sheen range of products and let that dry before finally parting it off. As usual, I'm completing the parting using a gentleman's saw to avoid any unnecessary damage to the piece. And finally then cleaning up the base of the piece using abrasives 120 to 320. Then a couple of coats of Danish oil just so that the base matches the rest of the piece. Okay, so there we have it. An apple graft union from a local fruit farm. Started 1 or 2 years ago, I can't remember, and finished this week. Now, a bit of an odd shape, but unfortunately I was governed by what wood I had to play with and the fact that I'd done some quite extensive hollowing in the first instance a couple of years ago. The resin mistake, I'm sure there's going to be a few people besides myself who have a good laugh at it. But nevertheless, outcome not too bad, I'm quite pleased with that. So, moving on to next week's video. This will be the last in a series of 3 on finishing unfinished projects. Now, a year or so ago, I found a very rotten, punky, old piece of burr elm, which I stabilised to demonstrate Yorkshire grit microfine with. It wasn't the best idea because there was still a lot of large holes in the burr which trapped the product. Now, when I stabilised this last year, I suspect I didn't make a good job of it, and the cactus juice didn't penetrate that far into the wood because I didn't really know what I was doing. So anyway, when I get this on the lathe next week, maybe the first job will be to stabilise it again. We'll see. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you again next week.